Hi, I'm Oded and I'm a software architect for the Wix Infrastructure Group.
I'm Avi and I'm a principal infrastructure engineer in the Wix backend guild. Today we're going to talk about a really interesting topic, developing and delivering code in a microservices-based environment. So API first definitely sounds like something I highly recommend all of our viewers to do, regardless to which company they work in.
And now let's say, okay, we have all the API written down, which is great. So I think we kind of now have a North Star of what we want to do. And well, in the end, you also need to kind of implement it. And we actually have, when we gave the example of the catalog, we actually have multiple services in this domain that we talked about e-commerce, selling things online. So there is the product, which is maybe one.
When you're saying services, elaborate, you mean like
domains? Wait, services is more technical. Domains. So product might understand it or not, but there's talks about products. This is one thing. There's inventory. Okay, how many I have for each product, and I have categories.
Customers, maybe.
And customers,
orders.
And I have all these things which we treat as domains. I mean, each one has a representation in the real
you mean domain is the essence of business domain?
Yes.
Okay.
It has a representation in real life. You know, product is something you can touch. There's the inventory is kind of the warehouse. Yeah. And what the question is, so what do we do about it? Many companies, and I think it's fine in some cases, write monoliths. So you say, okay, so each one of these domains, assuming that you identify them, by the way, is a table. And maybe I can also do it wrong, right? I can put the product with the name and price, and then I can put fields of inventory inside the table, because I didn't recognize. By the way, we can argue about it, but I say that, look, product is one thing, inventory management is another thing, so let's not mix it.
So you basically maybe separate bits of code and behavior, but if you're writing a monolith, or it's not about only your code is being a monolith, but your database is being also a monolith, right?
Yeah, maybe I separated tables. Maybe I didn't.
Yeah.
But in the end, even if I really try to separate my code, I will fail because...
I also agree. I worked in some companies that we did monoliths for years, and they're saying like this team only works on that jar or like DLL or something, and this team works only about that section, and it works good for a year. But then somebody needs a quick fix or something, and nothing prevents them from inserting code to another, and then he's referencing another layer, and then you have like a big bunch of code who gets deployed together, right?
But from your experience, did it also affect velocity?
Yeah, it definitely affects velocity because...
I mean developer velocity.
Yeah, even developer velocity, guys, the simple reason, right? It's like when you need to insert code and you have like 100 developers are committing code to the same repository. Like I remember we used to wake up at 7 a.m. just to manage to push our code, basically. So once like in the last years, we're seeing like a big movement, even in small companies, big companies, enterprises, movement towards using microservices, right? In microservices, we are referring to a paradigm and strategy when we write like really small, concise services, like and with independent databases, and we're basically literally creating a strong boundaries between services we are writing. Like if we take the previous example, to have a dedicated code who gets deployed independently for customers when it's database, and we have a clear boundary and a service and a database, different database for products and orders and everything. So our systems, it's basically a system of systems, right? So once you're like, when you modeled the catalog, when you thought about it, you knew you're going to walk to microservices. Like how did you choose between going monolithic and going microservices?
So when the catalog started, Wix was already working microservices. So it's a good example. And yet the product and inventory were placed inside the same service.
Oh.
Why? Because actually one of the hardest things, whether you work with microservices or not, one of the hardest things is identifying your domains and know where the boundaries are.
In domain-driven design, you're referring to bounded context, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now it might seem obvious to me because I went through the journey that product and inventory are not the same. But if I would try, I might be able to convince you that inventory is just a field inside product.
Yeah.
To say, is it in stock, is it not in stock, and maybe the amount in stock. That's it, right? So what is it really? Another bounded context, another domain? But in reality, when you think about it, and also when you look at competitors, which you should, you would see that actually inventory is so much more.
Yeah.
There's warehouses and locations, and it is so much more than just these two fields. So originally, it was not identified as another domain.
So it was like we can call it a small microservice.
Yeah,
right?
small microservice. It happens to be that it was the two tables, but same code. And as you said earlier, the code was not really separated.
Yeah. But the way what I'm seeing with the engineers I work sometimes, I'm seeing the other, right? People doing microservices and then they get addicted. They become like a services junkie, right? So everything gets separated too much. And then you also like have this problem from another area when people separate the things so much that just querying your data or getting your data becomes tremendously difficult.
Yeah, I can actually give an example of that. So a product might have properties such as,
categories maybe.
Categories. Actually,
should I have a category service?
So this is a hard one, by the way. So let's talk about it because it's actually an interesting case. So categories, let's say even what it is. It's like if you have a store, you can have men's shoes, women's shoes, all these kind of shirts, and you kind of want to tag this product where each category could be assigned to multiple products.
It's like a many-to-many relation, right?
Right. So should it be in its own domain or not?
Yeah, story of our lives, I guess. This kind of
it's not easy, right? On the one hand, it seems kind of small, like it only has name and image, and that's kind of it. Kind of hard to find more things to it.
I think a lot of people are asking themselves like whether category has an existing reason to be exist if product does not exist. If it has a meaning without the product.
So it does not, right? Yeah. And there's no point in having a category can be empty.
Yeah.
But its existence is to have products.
Yeah.
So is it or is it not its own domain? So when the catalog system was designed, it was decided this is not its own domain. But it turns out that even simple domains can become complicated over time. And now there's a requirement, for example, that a category can hold other categories, like a tree.
Yeah. Like subcategories.
Yeah. Yes. Oh. And requiring that it's like a tree and subcategory, when you step on the parent category, it brings all the child products.
So like a descendant thing. So you see me like behavior tend to grow. So
exactly.
When you're working and you're doing, especially if you're the architect of the product, how do you scope a domain and a microservice? How do you scope it and say like, this is the limit, this is where I cut the border?
It is hard. The best is around a business domain. So there is a product, there is an order. But even sometimes inside business domain, there might be things, for example, order has payment info. And it started initially with just one, which also might be your case, just one payment.
Yeah.
So it seems okay, but then over time it grew to having multiple payments, and now it gets complicated. And then at this point you start to realize that this might be its own domain. That handling payments is not the same as handling the actual order.
And how much effort do you put in this to trying to actually grasp the correct domain? Or you're saying like I can start with something and then I can divide it afterwards if I'm finding out it has too much logic and behavior?
Again, story of a life.
Yeah.
You should not spend too much time on it, but obviously the cost of splitting a domain, definitely. And also when you talk about monoliths, you can find many articles online about companies and what they had to do to split a monolith. So splitting out two domains is like the mini problem of that problem.
So it's a matter of balance. You said like I know that I might be wrong, but essentially I will ask maybe for opinion from my developers or my product people to try to actually model the real business problems. Like when doing domain-driven design, we're trying to solve problems with technology, but we model real-world problems, right?
Yeah, but what I think about what are the tools that we can use. So those business domains is the best.
Okay.
I found myself using read patterns. So for the example of the order,
like we talked before,
one of the questions I had was when someone is reading the order, does he sometimes or always or never want to get a payment with it? And if the answer is that they always want to get them together, it might affect my decision. There are other ways to solve it. It's not that I have to put them together solely because of this answer. I will also think about the microservice size.
Size, you mean amount of code or
yes.
more of code?
So if I have all this handling of the order, and this is like, let's say 1,000 lines of code, and then the handling of payments is 2,000 lines of code. So first, I don't know that, but I can assess the complexity of the domain. I might split them out so I can have more manageable
So
services.
you like business size, behavior size, you're taking everything under consideration, and then you take a decision, a concise decision, which is far more than an educated guess, something which is just like
in
really
the end,
like,
if in order to render my UI, especially the one that I want to show the buyers, but not only, I need to make 10 calls, then I failed.
Yeah. So once again, it goes to the API first and detecting domain discovery, and then understanding the read patterns helps you with the technology. This is like how things gets combined.
Right.
Okay.
So it's the good or bad of microservices. Microservices is amazing.
Yeah.
But it forces you to split your domains. And if you're talking about API first, so you recognize your domains, you build API for each domain. Where in each one you identify the main entity. One is for product, one is the inventory, one is for collection. And then each one should be in its own microservice. Obviously, it's debatable. You might say, I want 2 domains in the same microservice.
Yeah.
It's okay. I will say specifically for Wix that we have taken the path of trying not to do this.
Yeah, but I think it's like the big decision is you will probably sometimes be wrong in your like how did you separate the domains, but the big decision is not doing monolith anymore.
Yes.
It makes sense, right? Writing a small piece of code with its own database. It's like when you think about microservices, you think like why we didn't do it from the 90s, right? But it is the place to say to our viewers that if you're working, whether you're working in a startup or big organization or even a corporate, right? So microservices isn't the best thing since sliced bread. It's not that easy to implement it. It's like you need like a really strong distributed logging environment. You need a distributing tracing solution. You need to work with correlation IDs. It's not that easy.
So let me see if I understand what it means, distributed tracing. So in the monolith world, let's say that I would do some action that would go for multiple services. I can probably log it all along the way.
Yeah,
maybe I would randomize some GUID in the beginning of the request and
I mean, when we
log it along the way.
When we use monoliths, sometimes like the server had a log file, right? And that's it. It's like a
right. It was so
file.
easy. So now I have a request that maybe goes through like 5 different services along the way, and I need to somehow look in the log and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So you
want the same experience you had with monolith, right? You want the same experience. It's like the client requests that thing. I don't care if it passed through like 1 service or 10 services. I want to get the same experience of realizing what happened.
Yeah, but how can I do it? I mean, I guess different services means different log files.
Yeah, it's different log files, and I guess a lot of people know it. It's like we are streaming the log files. We're using a correlation ID, which is essentially a GUID of the request, and then we are putting it on the request header so we can actually detect and understand what happened throughout the given request. But this is the place to say, if you don't have this infrastructure or you don't aim to develop this infrastructure, please don't go to microservices. It won't end well, right? It's like it's like for me, it's like I won't be satisfied doing my work and going to microservices if I don't believe that I have the ability to put the effort on a specific infrastructure that will support the paradigm and strategy of using microservices.
But by the way, it's more than just a GUID, right? You have all these separate log files, and somehow you need to have one place that can create.
So a lot of people doing it with Elasticsearch or like Kibana or something, or New Relic. Some people do it.
And now I'm almost there, right? I have each log has this correlation ID, and then I have it all in one central place, and I can query it. And my system is still more complicated.
I think without that, it's like you just cannot going from monolith to microservices. So that's the reason a lot of startups, even these days, starting from a monolith, and once they get the big investment, then only then they're splitting their domains and going microservices. So another thing.
What about monitoring? I mean, how is it more complicated to know that your system works?
So of course, once you have like when you divided one server to basically now even Wix has like approximately almost 2,000 services. So you need like fine-grained monitoring, and it affects you have different services, so it's a different scale. You have different services, it's a different deployment cycle and versioning cycle. You need like a fine-grained infrastructure. We have like a lot of people in Wix only operating and working in the everyday job is to make sure facilitating microservices will be tremendously easy. I used to work in startups before Wix, and I wanted to go microservices for the entire benefits we talked about before, separating everything. Everything is concise and clear, and small code bases, which is always amazing. But we ended up spending maybe 30% of our dev power to have infrastructure for microservices. Definitely 30% of our time. Yeah, for sure. Another thing I wanted to ask is like, if we decided we're going to microservices, Wix has enough work power to go microservices. So you need to do a far better job communicating what happened in your code base, in your island, right? You have like a customer service, you have order service. So they need to communicate to the external world what happened. And of course, for the people who are doing software, I'm talking about doing messaging. Doing messaging with broker. A lot of you are using probably technologies like Kafka or Kinesis or RabbitMQ or any kind of a message bus that Azure provided or something, or PubSub in Google, right? The idea is to actually communicate messages to a predefined broker, like something like order completed, product added, product label change.
Let's just give one example of why is this needed in the domain that we already talked about. So I guess you said order completed. I guess when an order is completed, you want to reduce the inventory, for example.
And I want to get an email that my order completed.
Yeah, and I think, the email definitely seems like its own microservice, for example, because that's all it's doing, right? It's one domain of sending emails out.
So now it's like communication between services. Like there's like two main approaches, right? The first approach is synchronous, right? You're doing a request, a gRPC request, or like an HTTP, plain HTTP request, and then you get to your server and then you reply, right? But a lot of the communication now, it's also communicated in an asynchronous manner, right? So order completed, we are producing a message, whether it's a Kafka or something else. And then we have consumers that are like, have interest. They are stakeholders in that event or something.
Yeah, but wait, we have been talking so much in the beginning about API first approach.
Yeah.
And so, and we talked that the product entity and its capabilities. So, so what is this?
So what I wanted to ask you about doing, so it's really easy to define an API, but is it your API is only like your gRPC API or like a HTTP API? Or if we are using about messaging, like let's say the product has like the following events: product created, product updated, product deleted, right? So it has a schema for this information. When you're developing, you're saying like this product API has 5 endpoints, but it has 4 messages it produced upon behavioral things that happen in the code logic. Do you actually consult the product people about the schema of these events, or you're just like throwing this message because they're saying like it's not the same thing as the endpoint?
So it is definitely part of your API. Everything that we said about designing your regular API is true about this, including there are so many reasons why someone want to integrate. In fact, I heard a lot in Wix, why do we need events? Okay, because the product is often defining the use cases, and maybe it would seem like this is not needed. With autocomplete, it was really obvious, but maybe initially you don't even see why would anyone care that the product is created, updated, or deleted.
Yeah.
But then comes along, for example, by the way, a real one, a company that wants to integrate your product catalog with eBay. So they want to take your data and replicate it to their side. So you can have this grid where you decide, for example, which product you want to upload to eBay.
Yeah.
So
you discover the events you need to produce in the API design phase, along with the product. So you need, like you say, like this the endpoint will be, and this is the event.
But that's the basics. Okay, you said create, update, delete is probably
basically correct for every entity, right?
Almost every entity that I've seen, you would want to have these, and then sometimes you want to have more. For example, maybe for the catalog, having the price change is something so important that you want to have an event on its own.
Specific event for that.
Yeah. By the way, there is a question. What do you think that when you fire price change, should you also fire product updated?
Yeah. So I also tend, it's a matter of a business. I would always prefer to start easy. So when starting and produce only the full entity instead of those, and then going to concise events only if I have like a real business event. I have to start simple, and then give advanced requirements or fulfill advanced requirements only upon real case in reality. I'm not trying not to over-engineering it,
And there is this dilemma also was faced in Wix. Okay, so you have this product created and updated. Deleted is a little easier. What do you send?
Yeah.
I mean, for created, would you send just the ID, the entire entity?
But I think that the real thing that we can take from your experience is basically once you have when you're designing the API, you're seeing like designing the endpoint, the synchronous endpoint, and the messaging you're going to produce. So it's a bundle. You have to know what you're going to produce because people will consume your messages, right? So it's an API for every, doesn't matter how you look at it, it's an API.
It's an API, yes.
So, and once you know, like you have a product created, and you want to publish an event or produce an event for that, it's like when you have to decide which fields you're going to produce with. And then you're committing to those fields because you cannot change them afterwards. It's going to be like a breaking change or something.
Right, so I guess what I want to say
you have a responsibility.
Yeah, so you do have to decide though, what is your standard, right? Like with any API. And one of the dilemmas was really, so do you decide on which fields or you just send everything? Everything. So, yeah, by the way, it is a trade-off. Let's say, what happens when you don't send everything? If I don't send everything, then
endpoint consumer might not fulfill his will.
So he'll be calling you. Yeah. So in the end, you just increase the load on your system.
So you say, like, when somebody fulfilled an order, I want to send an email, I want to send the entire product information for the order, and now I don't have it on the payload.
Right, exactly. So I want to send everything. But also, there is the other edge of the sword, that the queues, the Kafka or whatever system, it's not unbounded. You cannot send a message with 100 megabytes on the wire. So it's sort of a trade-off. Also, when you have when you want to send updated, do you also send the previous one?
Yeah.
It's more data on the wire. Also, it's not trivial to do.
So I guess it all boils down once again to the access patterns. You need to know how you need to expose your data to the external world. Yeah, it sounds like really, really interesting. So once you're doing it, so we talked about API design. We talked about the fact that we're going with microservices, the hassle with it, and how we design, how we scope our services. So eventually we are at the point where we need to choose technology. Eventually we're engineers, right? So we need to take the proper technology and start implementing our wheel, right? So when you did this work in Catalog, how did you choose technology? And even you can answer it in a more how did you do it even in previous companies? When you go into a project, I guess most of our viewers, like nowadays we have like so many languages, like we have Go and Python and TypeScript.
If you work inside a monolith, then you kind of still chat, right?
You're doomed, right?
You're doomed. You continue to do what the person before you did. But if you chosen earlier microservices and a tool like Protobuf, then we can pretty much write our code in any language. We can go polyglot. And gRPC is going to be the agreed pattern between all of them.
And Kafka for messaging.
And if you use Kafka for messaging, it has a client for pretty much any language.
Yeah.
So your team can use whatever technology that they want to. There is also the other end of it, because we also said that we want the effort to create new microservices to be as small as possible.
Yeah, I guess even freedom has its limits, right?
Yes.
So because you don't want people to come and say, like, I want to write this service in C++, or I want that service in Rust or something.
Think about a common concern, like even connecting to Kafka or working with MySQL.
In 10 languages.
Yeah, and you want to give some sort of infrastructure that not everyone have to solve the same problems over and over again. So you might want not to go crazy with polyglot. But then again, maybe you won't. Maybe you don't care. You don't want to give this powerful infra.
When you talk about polyglot, is the ability to write services in multiple languages throughout the organization, right?
Yeah. If you don't mind that developers will go wild, then they can use any language, but then they would have to solve some of the wiring themselves.
I guess it's far bigger than that, because if you have a team of 5 backend developers, right? And you have a knowledge base between them. Like 5 of them know Scala, maybe 2 of them know JavaScript. You don't want the new guy will write something in Rust, right? Or something. Yeah. So it's a matter of like management.
Yeah, the thing, it's the common saying that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
For sure.
But then again, it's a good thing that you can maybe you decide that you want to take the company in a new technological direction. And use a new language, so you can.
What I found really a reason to go new language, because I don't like to put like things that's like I'm writing code in Go, I'm writing code in Kotlin. It's cool. No, when I'm inserting or introducing a new language to the organization, I'm doing it because it has I have a real motivation. I remember the last time I did something like that was like I really needed some good machine learning libraries. And we all know most of them, the vast majority of them are nowadays in Python.
Yeah.
So you're taking a language not because it's cool, because it gives you something that another language cannot give you. So it's the place to say, like in Wix, most of our backend APIs are working with JavaScript, TypeScript, and Scala, right?
Yes.
So in catalog, which kind of what did you end up choosing?
So in Scala, in the case of Wix, Wix chose to favor the Unify infrastructure over polyglot. Okay.
So we are practically in duoglot, like a lot of people are saying. Like we have Scala and Node.js.
Scala and Node, exactly. So let's focus on these two. Try to provide amazing experience that you can set up microservices in minutes, and all these wiring, and I will explain what I mean by wiring. So you have your service, and then you want to communicate with another service.
Like you mean RPC call to another
service? I want to make a call, like an RPC call to another service.
Then you want to consume a message from another service.
Exactly, a consumer message. I want to work with MySQL, and there's more. I can give like things like
this is how I want to do monitoring. This is how I'm doing logging. Like
GDPR,
GDPR,
for example, encryption. So many things to take care of. So Wix really went to the direction, let's solve it once, solve it well for 2 languages, and everyone would work with it. But then again, someone comes and want to write with Go. We say, yeah, sorry. I mean,
So if you're doing Scala or Node, you're getting like the best Swiss knife the company can give you. So you can do so many things. And if you go in another thing, you're on your own, basically.
Right. So Wix did not encourage it, for example.
Yeah, but basically for me, like when I'm choosing which language now between Scala and Node is like if I have simple service that's not blocking IO, especially if it's not blocking IO, Node can be like a really good candidate. But if I'm doing something that has calculation in CPU bound, I will always choose Scala because Node is single threaded and choosing the CPU things, we just cannot do it.
There's something I want to ask you. I mean, let's say we have all this separation of microservices that we said in terms of domains. We say we have product and inventory, and it works great. Then someday you wake up in the morning and the product comes to you and say, hey, you know what? I want to filter for products which are in stock.
Yeah, so it's one of it's our bread and butter. It's like what happened with microservices, one of the disadvantages, I guess, is now instead of one database, monolithic database that I'm calling it like everything was one join away, right? It's like you can do everything with like, I can add another join, and get you every data you wanted. It was really, really easy because essentially you didn't even have to think about the access patterns because everything is closed. Now we divided everything. We told the manager, we need to divide everything. It's better. It's easier to maintain. We get a separated deployment cycle. We develop a good logging infra and tracing infra. But now what happened is customer is sitting in one database, or you're sitting in another database, product in another database. And the product guy comes to you and said, like, remember, like 10 years ago, I built systems and we can actually query orders with entire customer data and product data. And now we don't have it anymore. And he says, like, did your engineering thing, but now my product is lacking, right? So I guess every person watching this video and worked or is working currently with microservices right now is knowing that, like, it's all about data when you work doing microservices. And what you end up doing is doing a materialization views, right? So essentially materialization views, for those who's not familiar, is actually imagine all of your domains producing messages that reflects changes in the domain, like we talked before, product updated, product created, order deleted. And we have a simple isolated artifact that actually consumes these entire messages and build a materialization of data of those combined and save it to whether it's MySQL or Elasticsearch or anything like that. So you can query your data with filters from both of the domains. So it's really important to say this kind of materialization is eventually consistent. It's not a form of eventually consistent. And even when I'm working with product people, I make sure my product people knows what eventually consistent is.
So let's see, how would I explain to the product? I say, hey, look, if you take, so first.
If I updated now an order and I'm going to the search screen, it might take a few seconds to appear.
Yeah.
Right? I'm saying like this is you have to be familiar with the term eventually consistent. All of product people in Wix, the vast majority of them at least, knows what eventually consistent means. And then we have the same terminology when we talk about features. So definitely, if you change an order, then it produces an event. Somebody needs to consume it. Sometimes it's going through a retry phase. It can take time, but eventually I know my search will be synced with my databases. So yeah, we have a lot of hassle with it, working with materialization views in microservices. It takes code, it takes thoughts. It's one of the things you have to go when you're doing microservices. So
yeah, also it brings the question, let's say that you have done your materialization. So you have, like I said, product and inventory. Yeah. And then you want to add like one more property for inventory to the product.
So
then you have to start doing
all over. So definitely, it's a hustle. You have a lot of solutions about it. We in Wix have a lot of infrastructure that helps you do it, but I think it's inevitable doing materialization when going microservices, because even over time, like you said, you can try and discover the access patterns of your service, but eventually things change, and you need a different filter, and you have new fields, right? So because fields are keep on adding, especially in e-commerce systems, you have a big objects, large entities, and things change. So materialization is essential, and what I recommend is actually if your company is getting, or your organization getting larger, so a good thing would be like to have maybe an infrastructure to do materialization. Some people do it by hand, some people doing it with things like Kafka Streams, or there's a lot of solutions, but yeah, it's like the fact we design microservices, regardless to Wix or any other company, usually come hand with data materialization, and sometimes even a simple GraphQL can help, although it's not the same as data materialization.
Right. How do you deploy a new service to production, by the way, without knowing that you broke the entire system?
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, there's more than one layer to this. I mean, in a monolithic world, I could have tests for the entire thing.
Yeah, monolithic was the best with it. It's like you have a giant code base, everybody's fighting to push in code, but then it gets tested as a single unit, and then you either have a great success or a great failure with it, and you're going
right. So now I have like two new challenges. One, when I deploy a new service to production, well, I guess I tested it, right? I mean, in Wix we worked it in general.
When you talk about testing it, you're referring to unit test, integration test?
So I mean unit test, that is the basic. If you remember API first, so I would want to make sure that my API works. So if I have a contract to say create product, I want to make sure that product was created, updated, deleted, everything. I tested all of it, and it all works, which is amazing.
Yeah. The single unit of this product service.
But this single unit is part of a huge machine, which maybe I don't even understand to the full because it's so big.
Definitely.
And then, like maybe I want to test it with some of the other pieces, and also tests are great, but when I deploy it to production, how do I even know that I didn't break anything?
So maybe elaborate with an example. When you're saying like test it with the rest, so you want an environment that actually makes the product service interact with the customer, with the order service, and test the end-to-end feature of it.
So yeah, I mean, I wonder if I do this, am I breaking the concept of microservices?
I know a lot of people, especially in small organizations, they're saying like, yeah, we figured it out. We have a staging environment. But a lot of big companies, like we're talking about Wix, or even companies half the size of Wix, they literally cannot have a staging environment. We're talking about huge systems.
You know what? Also, staging environment is not a real thing. It doesn't have real production data.
It's more than your computer. Traffic. It's more than your Mac or PC, but it's not production.
It's also another step in the way. You know, I want to get. It's arguable, yes, but I think that getting to production is a value. I want it in production ASAP, and this staging environment is another step in the way. And I guess if you have a staging environment, then I guess someone, maybe you, is testing it, and then loading into production, then probably testing it again.
Yeah. So what?
Unless you have a lot of faith, I don't know.
So what is your approach? What are you doing if you tested the product locally on your computer and you have unit tests, maybe some few integration tests on your computer, but how do you know for a fact that you can tell your manager, your product people that the e-commerce system as a whole is working?
So there are multiple answers to this question.
Yeah.
One, and this is again, I think it's something that you have to have if you have a big organization with microservices, is some sort of system that has feature toggles. Meaning that it's as simple as it sounds. Yes, or if closed old code, else if opened new code.
So it's like a kill switch.
Yeah, like a kill switch, and everything that you adds any new code that you add is closed behind these feature toggles, and then in production you need to have the capability of opening it only for yourself. And
what do you mean opening only for yourself?
It means that I can using my own user in Wix or whatever system, I
like a context or something.
Yeah, I open it so that only my own requests are going
to
the new flow.
That, yeah.
And you know, it might be more complicated. Maybe I'm making a call and there's Kafka's, but it needs to support all of that.
And you do it for every piece of new code?
Yeah.
Wow. So all of your developers, when they're delivering new code, they know they have to deliver it behind a feature toggle. So they have a kill switch if they're like fucked up the entire
Yeah,
system.
it needs to go into production when it's off. And then you turn it on, and then maybe you turn it on for everyone. Maybe you turn it on gradually, you open maybe to only 20% of the traffic, and then you gradually increase.
But still, like people will see it. Like I remember when I started doing microservices, but the first system I did with microservices, which is non-monolithic, a lot of people, like my boss asked me, he was like an old school guy, like 60 years old, doing C and C++ for years. He asked me, would you go on a plane that every part of the plane got tested separately? And I was standing there, going home and actually thinking about like for weeks about what he said, and said like, I don't know how to answer it. Like I wouldn't go to the plane, I wouldn't do it, but I'm selling him the idea of doing the same with testing. So how do you feel about that?
So even before that, there is one more protection layer that you have, which is it is very efficient, and that is doing canary deployments. Even before you do tests.
Okay, please elaborate a bit about canary deployments.
Okay, so I have my new code, and I want to get into production. But it's like if you take the example of the plane, I would just shove the new engine and take off, and maybe it will just blow up.
Yeah.
But luckily, this is not we're not building an airplane.
Yeah.
So what I can do is I can say that like a small percentage of the traffic is going through my my new code, like my new service. I have
which is already being safeguarded by a feature toggle.
Yes.
So you have like combination of canary deployment plus feature toggle.
Right. And now I need to do, I mean, it won't be perfect, but I need to do sort of metrics comparison between the old service and the new service. Like one trivial metrics to look at would be error rate.
You mean old version versus new version?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if before I had 1% error rate and now the new service has 5% error rate.
Yeah, definitely.
Then it seems something is wrong, and then I will gradually increase the exposure. And if I see that something is wrong, I will roll back the version and explain what went wrong. Otherwise, after a while, and it does take time. I mean, right now with Wix, it's like 1 hour and a half. Within 1 hour and a half, I can gain enough confidence that it's okay.
So it reminds me, like I came from a bit of a security background. So it's reminds me that security is like the first thing about security that people tell you is like security is being done in layers, right? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like to me pretty similar to what you're saying, is that essentially you cannot know everything works at every given moment. So what you're doing is like every piece of new code is behind a feature toggle, and the entire feature toggle is being exposed to the external world with a canary deployment.
Yes.
So even if you open your code with a feature toggle and something goes bad, not all the traffic gets there.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think that even providing that, which is far better than not doing anything, right? It's like, how do you know the entire e-commerce system works? Because you have features like maybe let's say about this easiest feature in e-commerce system, I'm opening a cart, I'm adding 5 products, I'm paying with a credit card, and then I'm getting an email that everything works okay. I mean, it's a feature. Once we have monoliths, everything works in one code base, and we knew that feature correlates to an email. So and the product people saying like, this is the feature I want, this is the user journey. So, and we as geeks and engineers develop this fully crazy spaceship microservices thing. So do you actually test the entire use flow?
This is a very, very difficult question, because any attempt to test the entire flow kind of breaks the principle of microservices. But there are two.
You mean testing the flow is testing like a feature, like testing a given feature that hits like 5 servers.
Let's take a concrete example. So there's the entire e-commerce. What is the purpose of e-commerce? That people are able to buy. So anyone that works in e-commerce in R&D needs, in order to sleep at night, he needs to know that checkout is working.
Definitely, I know.
Okay, if checkout isn't working for 5 minutes, that's tons of money just down the drain. So you might want to test this flow. But how? So there's one approach, which is let's have automation running on production. Okay, let's say that some script, whatever, runs every 5 minutes, 1 minute, 1 hour, whatever you want, and he's doing a checkout with, let's say, Selenium or something like this.
Why like checkout? You're choosing like really important features.
Yes.
So you take a set of.
Yeah, it is costly, so I definitely wouldn't recommend doing it for everything.
And I even imagine it, this concrete example of checkout. You actually have like credit cards, and you have to do like a payment. So how do you do it like in a testing mode?
It's hard. You might have a test credit card.
Oh.
Okay, for example, that's if you're running it on production, that you have to have something like this.
Definitely.
And on the one hand, it's good because you are testing the real thing. Like if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. On the other end, it's it's a little too late.
Yeah.
It's already in production, but it's better than that the automation would find it than your users. And the other approach, it is problematic, but it is used even in Wix. Is I will do a unit test that spins multiple microservices. And even here, there's two branches. There's one branch of
unit test that's actually on your computer.
That on your computer you can test the flow. So how can this magic happen? So
I mean, a lot of people when they start microservices, they say like, I want to test everything. I want to feel sure like I felt in monolith. So they're trying to spawn like 7 or 8 services with maybe 5 databases and something. But we both know it won't scale, right?
Yeah, there are two. I mean, there's two.
Not even talking about the time it takes you to do.
There are two problems with this approach. One would also exist in the other approach. One, the time and complexity that you need in order to set up these 5 or 6 microservices. To start them with their, with their HTTP service. But yeah, what about Kafka?
Yeah, so you need to spin up the broker as well.
Yeah, and there's also all the peripheral services because you're not on a lone. Even your 7 services don't sit on a lonely island.
Yeah. So we're not spawning them with our computer because it's basically impossible, and we don't want a staging environment because we talked about it before. So we are glitching to a place when you say it like, if I have a set of the core features, like, I don't know, doing a checkout or something really, really major, I'm going to do it on production. I'm going to test it in production.
Usually, but you can. I will explain. Like, there's a problem with this approach, but I will do some kind of multi-service unit test. So I will not actually spin the services.
Okay.
But I will actually try to take all the logical layer and start it. And then I would need to solve some problems. When services want to talk to each other, I would have to wire it for the test.
Like mock it with the fake.
Yeah, but mock it, but they will call each other, but I need it to work despite not having the actual networking under the hood because I don't want to start it up. And when it comes to Kafka, again, I would have to set up some mock.
Yeah.
If I publish some message, then...
And then we're waiting to the place of production. How, if it works on that kind of environment, how do you actually know it works on prod? Because everything is like so different,
Yeah, it's as close as you can get it without actually spinning the services. And you still have some problems, there's the other peripheral services. Again, you're not on a lonely island. So like take the Wix example, there's a service that is in charge of getting website information. So you're not going to start it, so you need to have a mock for it.
Yeah.
And also, well, this is nice. You think about a single programming language, at a Scala, then it works, then you start everything. Yeah. And then when you go polyglot, this
and then
doesn't
you're
really
trying
work.
to actually create this crazy in-memory environment, and now you have multiple languages. I think all of us tried it when you started microservices because we wanted, every time when you switch like paradigm or strategy, you want to actually have what you had before, right? It's like when you see programmers or developers going through languages. So if they're writing Scala after the right node, it looks like JavaScript. If they're writing strict type language, it looks like...
So what can you do? So we talked about testing in production. It seems a little late. And also, if you ever written or have been in a company that does automation, it's a hassle. Automation is always behind.
Definitely. Always. It's a never-ending battle.
Yeah, and it's flaky and it never works to the full, so it's definitely not ideal. What I think in Wix is kind of a cool compromise that I guess our viewers can try. So we said that there's the concept of canary deployment, which means that you can start a service and then gradually bring more traffic to it. So what Wix decided to do is to create something called employee preview. That you can the latest code always runs in production, but only traffic that comes from within a company when people actually see Wix users are sitting inside a company.
So it's yet another control mechanism for new code being deployed.
Exactly. So it's not a staging environment; it's the real thing, but it means that only specific traffic that cannot harm Wix in any way is going through the service, and then you can test things like that. It still doesn't guarantee anything because it's not like every time that you push new code, you go and test checkout. But this is sort of a good compromise. It also comes with a cost because whenever there is an issue, you have to wonder, wait, is this real? Is it real? Yeah. And so with all these tools, in the end, I mean, it's all theoretical, but practically, Wix is able to maintain pretty good stability in production.
Yeah.
So the plane keeps flying, although only its parts are being tested.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about like whatever kind of added value we can give to our viewers. So what I think both of us are totally 100% agreed on is trying to spawn up the entire microservices environment on your computer. Don't even go there.
No,
don't even try. You will lose this battle, right?
Been there.
I can tell the same. I've tried, and it's miserably failing after a few times.
The macro test, it's viable approach. It actually works right now this way in ecom, but as your system gets more complex, or if you go polyglot, and it does have its cost.
Yeah.
I mean, to wire all the mocks. So you can try that, but you need to be aware that it comes with a heavy price.
So I think unit test fully unit test your code in a given service. It's a must, basically.
Yeah,
it's a must to know your logic works. Everything is basically that. And then what you said is like beyond that unit test, you are part of a large organization. So you have canary deployments, you have A/B testing mechanism that can have like a kill switch for new features. You redirect traffic incrementally. So you have a lot of layers that gives you like a large amount of control of new code being introduced to the system. So you're doing your testing in layers, and sometimes you're not saying like I need something like a big fancy staging environment, which is like highly costly and the maintenance of it is hell. I'm doing it on production, but I'm doing it in a responsible way. I have canary deployments, I have feature toggles, and my developers know how to introduce a new code to the system.
But there is one last point that I guess everyone needs to understand when maintaining production systems. These are layers by definition. They're not hermetic.
Yeah.
And you will at some point have a production issue.
Yeah.
And that's why you have the last layer, which is you mentioned earlier, which is the monitoring. Okay,
Definitely.
so even if something went through all the layers and your monitoring system detected it within 5 or 10 minutes, and then you were able to respond quickly, which usually
in an automatic manner.
Rolling back or closing the feature toggle that you opened. If you were able to do it within 5 and 10 minutes, then you are good. You will probably be able to maintain whatever SLA you promised.
And same in canary deployments. If we're going to see our newly created code that runs only for Wix employees, in 5 minutes give like 10 times more the ratio of errors, we know how that we need to roll it back.
Yes.
And then you can check your errors in the new code after it's no longer deployed and got rolled back to the previous version. So yet another mechanism to be sure with your code.
Yeah.
So I think so it's maybe not the entire airplane got tested with all of its parts, but it's fair to say it's safe for flight.
Yes.
Definitely.
I mean, in practice.
Yeah, it's a matter of compromises at the end of the day. So, okay, that's it for today. Thank you, Oded.
Thank you, Avi.
And you are more than welcome to leave us any question or remarks here below. Thank you and see you next time.